Votes for women! Votes for women!
That's great. This will do so much for the collective bargaining power of working class women.
What?
And immigrant women. If they've chosen to live their lives in this country, they should at least have a say in how it's run.
I didn't...
And for black women, it's the least we could do after having kidnapped their ancestors and exploited them for centuries.
I didn't mean those women.
Oh, then who did you mean?
Good, respectable women.
Don't all those women deserve respect?
You know who I mean. Women like us.
Ah, right. Given, well, current events, we are all understandably rather fired up about feminism and women's rights. Protests, much discussion of voting, etc. Within the historical costuming community, I've seen some folks looking to the suffragette movement and their iconic white dresses and striped sashes as a way to express our frustration. And while I am all for wearing cool outfits to protest in, there is a lot hiding under those fluffy white dresses, and it's not all pretty. Like white supremacy. Very not pretty. Hi, I'm V, fashion history nerd and firm believer that my feminism will be intersectional or my feminism will be bullshit. I was already planning a video about the complexities of suffragette worship and the white dresses before that Supreme Court draft got leaked, so this seems like a timely moment to take a closer look at the history of women's rights movements. A couple of years ago, there was this whole fuss about it being 100 years since the 19th Amendment and women winning the right to vote, and a great many posts and articles and such reminding us that it was really just white women that got the right to vote then. Many women of color were still denied the vote because of their race until later policy changes, and we still have plenty of racially motivated voting restrictions today. This isn't something we can separate from the suffragettes or their pretty white dresses. To explain why the suffragette outfits were tangled up with white supremacy, I'm going to have to explain how they became part of the women's suffrage movement in the first place. Just a little heads up. In this video, I am about to go full-on social justice costumer and maybe ruin some of your historical faves. If you are not here for anti-racist, anti-classist, trans-inclusive, pro-choice, etc. historical fashion commentary, you should probably leave now because you won't like this one. You should probably also just leave my channel because you won't like my other stuff much better. And this is probably a good point to tell you that the comments are moderated, so if you do decide to go down there and start a mess, no one's ever gonna read it. If you do like social justice fashion history, you should subscribe, because we do a lot of this here, and if you're a nerd like me and want further reading, you can find my entire annotated bibliography on my Patreon. When I started researching, I was really surprised to see there wasn't much on YouTube about how and why the suffragette outfit is so recognizable and what it stood for. It's such a fascinating junction of issues. How fashion can be used in political narratives, both obvious and covert branding and marketing, and how it's important to understand the full context of anything in history before putting it on a pedestal. It was actually too much to fit into one video, so look out for another one soon where Ora Lynn and I will dig even deeper into the racism specifically. Usual disclaimer on gendered terms. The historical women's suffrage movement certainly contained people who wouldn't call themselves women with our current understanding of gender, and excluded many people who would be called women today. However, the term women's rights is ironically appropriate for the historical movement because they only advocated for a binary and reductive definition of women, and modern feminist movements are still not out of that habit. The beginnings of what we now call the suffragette movement were in the mid-19th century, and initially in the US were one and the same as the abolitionist movement. There was a schism in the aftermath of the Civil War, because racism, more on that later. These early women suffragists included one Amelia Bloomer, originator of the bloomer suit costume and thus the word bloomers. Unfortunately, anti-suffragists seized on even the small rejection of gender roles and created caricatures of suffragists as masculine, trouser-wearing non-women. This level of ridicule and mockery was a major setback to the movement, with the damage being done to their public image and the cage crinoline offering a comparatively more comfortable way to wear the large bell-shaped skirts of the 1850s. All of these early suffragists eventually abandoned the bloomer suit. The suffrage movement didn't make fashion part of their cause again until the 1900s, and when they did, they went exactly in the opposite direction. As the suffrage cause developed into an organized protest movement, it became useful to establish visual indicators and standards, both for recognition of the movement and to control the narrative and the story that would shape public opinion and eventually policy. Women's suffrage suffrage leaders, particularly in Britain, saw the harm that the unfeminine image had done to their cause and wanted to undo it. Western understanding of gender was considered the foundation of the social order, and the gendered role of a woman was considered the social and emotional glue that held society together. These cartoons allowed women suffrage activists to be demonized as a threat to that society. Hold on, I need to put on some pearls so I can clutch them. Oh my goodness! Women are wearing trousers and using their brains and caring about politics! What is the world coming to? Society will surely collapse! By dressing fashionably and femininely, even while staging marches and breaking windows, the suffragettes were saying, look, we're not trying to destroy the fabric of society or whatever. We're still gonna be women in all the sexist ways that matter. We just want the vote as well. English suffragist leader Sylvia Pankhurst, who had been to art school and did visual merchandising for WSPU events, said, many suffragists spend more money on clothes than they can comfortably afford rather than run the risk of being considered outre and doing harm to the cause. The term suffragette was initially meant to be demeaning, but since anti-suffragists could no longer mock suffragists for being masculine, they instead mocked them for being feminine with a diminutive nickname, which, of course, was made into a rallying cry. White clothes were fashionable in the 1900s regardless of one's politics. Just look at all these fluffy white lingerie dresses. Adopting it as a sort of uniform was practical as well as being good for the narrative. White blouses, if not dresses, were so ubiquitous that suffragists of any demographic would own one. And since white outfits were so fashionable, it maintained a certain level of plausible deniability when that was needed. In Britain, purple and green were chosen as accent colors, leading to the familiar striped sashes, but also a wide array of more subtle accessories. Jewelry like necklaces and brooches was sold with suffragette color branding, allowing the wearer to subtly show their support for the cause. We even have a pair of stockings from the Chetsey Museum embroidered with the phrase "Votes for Women." On my side of the pond, purple and gold were also used before being officially adopted in 1913. Apparently the gold comes from the Kansas suffrage referendum in 1867, the state flower of Kansas being a gold sunflower. This was the campaign where Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton worked with a blatantly racist politician called George Francis Train, trying to get a women's suffrage bill passed by attacking black suffrage. This would pretty much set the tone for the US women's suffrage movement for the next 50 years. So we know what that gold stands for. Unfortunately, all this clever fashion branding relied on some really damaging social ideas about femininity and what made a good woman. It's that age-old Madonna-whore double standard, although it was less Madonna versus whore than Madonna versus choose your hodgepodge of sexist, classist, transphobic, and racist stereotypes. These delicate outfits, chosen to be above criticism, are telling the world, look what a good woman I am. Look how little of a threat I am to your ideas about gender. Look how well I perform my gender role, which entitles me to comfort and protection. Look how cruel these policemen are for grabbing me. How dare they lay their hands on such a fine, upstanding member of the fair sex. The social contract of the time stated that white Western men were supposed to treat ladies with the utmost respect and courtesy, opening doors and pulling out chairs, as long as the ladies in question held up their end. Men who didn't treat women with these paternalistic sorts of good manners were considered coarse and boorish and low class, not because they were sexist, but because they didn't express their sexism in gentlemanly ways. By the way, this is the same social contract and ideal of white femininity that was being used at the same time to justify lynchings. When suffragettes put on such an aggressive performance of perfect ladylike Western colonizer femininity, while getting manhandled and arrested and dragged off by the police, it turned all the narratives about suffragists breaking the social contract on their heads. Instead of noisy, masculine, ill-bred, low-class, and also non-white women with damaging political ideas being put back in their places by upstanding men trying to maintain the fabric of their society, now it looked like the policemen were uncouth brutes committing an offense against the purity of virtuous, classy white womanhood. It changed the narrative. So now the anti-suffragettes were the ones breaking the social contract. Very effective, yes, and completely reliant on that ideal of classy white womanhood being upheld. Harmful as it was, this was super clever branding and narrative control. Oftentimes, as much as we would like to live in a more just world, we have to work within the constraints of what's around us. And I am all for manipulating oppressive social structures in order to tear them down. This would have been a great way for these white suffragettes to leverage their privilege, leverage this ideal that others couldn't embody, and this protection that others couldn't claim, to fight for the rights of people who didn't have that leverage and protection, and face greater consequences for stepping out of line. It would have been great. if that's actually what they'd done. In the US especially, the women's suffrage movement not only included but actively courted white Southerners who were pursuing suffrage specifically because of white supremacy. Some suffragettes were involved with other progressive political causes, like labor rights, abolition, disability justice, and anti-fascism, and some were not. That schism between the abolitionist movement and early US women suffragists, that's where this started. Probably the most illustrative example I can give is the argument between Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frederick Douglass over the 15th Amendment. Douglass wanted to accept this amendment that would give voting rights to black men as a step in the right direction while continuing to fight for women's suffrage alongside abolition. Stanton responded to this by pulling her support for the 15th Amendment and giving a speech filled with racist and classist stereotyping. She said, "The 15th Amendment creates an antagonism everywhere between educated, refined women and the lower orders of men." From this point, it was abundantly clear that these white suffragists weren't actually interested in anti-racism. They had simply been using the abolitionist movement to achieve their own ends. Realizing that a national policy of women's suffrage wouldn't pass without support from the South, the National American Women's Suffrage Association adopted a policy of trying to convince Southern politicians that they could protect white supremacy by giving white Southern women the vote. Belle Kearney, a speaker and lobbyist for NAWSA, straight up said the enfranchisement of women would ensure immediate and durable white supremacy in 1903 at a NAWSA conference in New Orleans that black suffragists were barred from attending. Say it with your whole chest, why don't you? Fluffy Edwardian bust improvers and all. In 1913, a group of white women suffragists broke off from NAWSA to form the Southern States Women's Suffrage Association, because NAWSA wanted a constitutional amendment which might have enfranchised black women too. And though white supremacy was not an official goal for NAWSA the way it was for the Southern States Association, that didn't stop leader Alice Paul from trying to segregate all the black participants in a massive demonstration in 1913. Knowing that context, these white dresses are honestly reminding me a lot of the concept of white women tears. So when a white woman cries to induce guilt or bring down external consequences on a black person because she, consciously or unconsciously, recognizes that white women are viewed as fragile, delicate creatures who must be protected at all costs. I've seen white women do this to other white people and POC too, but it's a particularly insidious problem within white women's interactions with black people. Please see my earlier comment about the use of white femininity to justify racist violence, but we'll dig deeper into that next time. We are implicitly taught to think that anyone who reduces a white woman to tears must be a horrible brute and owes her an apology. The suffragettes getting arrested in their lovely, fashionable, feminine white dresses kind of look like they're doing the same thing. And yes, if they had turned around and used that white femininity and privilege to fight for the rights of all who were denied suffrage, to fight against racism and classism and other things as well as for their own power, it would have been an admirable use of the arbitrary advantages they were given. But they didn't. Most of them were fighting to hold on to their own place and privilege in a changing social order. White women got their vote, and most of them took it and went home, every bit as racist as they had always been. And they left many of women of color without the vote thanks to Jim Crow laws, exclusion from citizenship, language requirements, and other racially motivated restrictions. I am not going to claim that the suffragettes' fashion branding was not a very politically savvy move. It was a clever way to advance their agenda. Taken without context, it looks intelligent and empowering and feminist. It played on well-established social tropes and structures, and created an accessible visual shorthand for a political movement. It was great marketing, but in the context of how the women's suffrage movement interacted with the other political forces of the time, in the context of their actual agenda, it's very symbolic of white women weaponizing white femininity in order to uphold white supremacy. To quote an article by Sharonda Knott Dawson, in the same way we are clear that black people were not part of the independence of America, we are also clear that black women were not part of women's suffrage. So as nice as it would be to look up to the women who won us the vote, I have a really hard time with how uncritically this image is held up. I do not want to associate myself with a movement that prioritized white women's social superiority over black humanity. I don't want to look up to people who were so focused on getting their own right to vote that they were willing to push other people down to do it. The issue of white women voting in the interest of their whiteness and power over others, rather than in solidarity with more marginalized groups, is still a problem today. It's basically how we got this awful Supreme Court draft. White women were a major demographic factor in electing Trump, and it's his Supreme Court appointments that are threatening our medical agency. So I think the real question is this: am I standing up for equal rights and reproductive justice only for myself, or am I standing up for all of the people facing worse circumstances than I am? For me to dress up as a suffragette, given how much that movement only prioritized white, cis, upper or middle class women, would be to say that I am only in this for my own power and protection, which, as I said earlier, would make my feminism bullshit. Thank you for joining me as I vent my frustration through shouting on the internet about history. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my video with Aura, where we'll talk about suffragettes and anti-racism in more depth. Leave a like, and tell me in the comments about your favorite historical protest fashion pieces. If you want even more nerdy history reading, my annotated bibliography is available on my Patreon, linked in the description. You can find me around the internet at Miss SnappyDragon, including TikTok now. Happy Juneteenth to everyone. May it be joyous for my Black viewers and reflective for the rest of us. Now, get yourself one of Muse and Dionysus' excellent suffrage t-shirts, and remember that until we are all of us free, we are none of us free.
That's... Okay. 3. Well, no, now there's a car. Probably gonna think we're complete weirdos anyways.
Yeah, that's fine.